And welcome to Samvera Connect 2022. You should be able to see my slide now, and I know if that changes, Carolyn will let me know. I just have a little bit of housekeeping to start our day before we start our sessions. So please note that this webinar has live closed captions available. Simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. The conference is being recorded, so the video will be posted to YouTube each day, and next week we'll have it edited into individual sessions, so you'll be able to share them. We have a Q&A function in Zoom for asking questions of the presenters whenever time allows, and our Connect Slack channel is the place to be this week for conversation with other attendees and to follow up with questions with the presenters if your questions don't get answered in the session. If you need access to the Samvera Slack workspace, there's a link on the Connect Schedule page where you can request access. And we also have a hashtag for Twitter users. It's hashtag Samvera 2022. So today's sessions are going to run for 3 hours and 20 minutes. We're going to have a 10-minute break after our keynote, and we'll also have a 10-minute break after the first hour and 20 minutes. Wanted to let everyone know that beginning tomorrow, and something that's new for us this year, you'll also have the option to join a Zoom meeting-based Birds of a Feather conversation group after the plenary sessions. So that'll be starting tomorrow and then going through our last day on Thursday. So there are a few concurrent sessions to choose from each day, and they're led by a volunteer facilitator. And the session might provide an opportunity to discuss a topic from a presentation or to learn and ask questions about a virtual poster. And they're all a chance to learn and network with fellow attendees. So access information for those sessions are in the schedule. And we also have sessions available if you'd like to facilitate a conversation about something you hear about at Connect. So now I'll just spend a few minutes talking about our expectations for Samvera events. Samvera is dedicated to providing a welcoming and harassment-free experience for everyone. From the very beginning, this open source collaborative has been committed to openness and transparency in all that it does, code, designs, and discussions. We're equally committed to helpful and respectful communication. Historically, women, people of color, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups have been excluded from technology work, and ironically from open source software communities in particular. The Samvera community is committed to removing barriers to participation wherever they exist. And our community guidelines reflect our commitment to collaboration. We thrive due to the full spectrum of contributions made by our community members. Collaboration is reflected throughout the work presented at this event, and we must ensure that all feel welcome to contribute and supported all along the way. The community guidelines express our values in the context of the everyday activities of the Samvera community, and they serve as the principles by which our members act and collaborate. And they complement the code of conduct and the anti-harassment policy. The code of conduct expresses our expectations for respective communication as we work and interact with each other. So if you haven't already, please take time to review these documents. You should have clicked on them when you registered also for Connect, and we expect participants at all community events and forums to honor these standards. In building on the framework provided by these documents, each Samvera community member has a role to play in creating and promoting a welcoming and safe community. If a situation arises that may represent a violation of our code of conduct or anti-harassment policy, and you feel you cannot or should not address it alone, please contact a member of this year's program committee, a member of the Samvera board, or a helper. And here are our helpers for today. Carolyn, who you'll hear from later today, Hannah Frost, and Alicia Morris. You can reach out to them through direct message on Slack. You can also email helpers@samvera.org to reach our helpers for today. So please, we'll hope you're going to get the most possible out of our virtual event. Have fun, learn new things, maybe get to network with someone at our Birds of a Feather conversations, and share your questions and help us move forward. And so with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote. Michael C. Frank is David and Lucille Packard Professor of Human Biology at Stanford University and Director of the Symbolic Systems Program. He received his PhD from MIT in Brain and Cognitive Sciences in 2010, and he studies language use and language learning, focusing especially on early word learning. He's the founder of the Many Babies Consortium. It's a collaborative replication network for infancy research, and he's led open data projects including WordBank and MetaLab. He was a Jacobs Foundation Fellow and has received the Trollin Award for the National Academy of Sciences, the FAB's Early Career Impact Award, and the MAR Prize. He has served as chair of the governing board of the Cognitive Science Society and has edited journals including Cognition and Child Development. I'm going to stop sharing now and welcome Michael.
Hello, thank you so much for that generous introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. All right, can you just confirm that you see my screen and everything looks good?
Yep, looks great.
Wonderful. Okay. So thanks very much for having me here, and I'm very excited to connect with this community, which I didn't know about before the invitation, and I think there's a lot of interesting commonalities here. So my goal with this talk is to tell you the story of how I went from somebody who basically just studied kids language acquisition to somebody who builds data repositories, and to tell you a little bit about what I've learned along the way. I suspect that many of these lessons will resonate with the work that all of you do, perhaps more so than my work on child language. And so I'm really eager to hear about these connections in terms of building tools and building repositories and thinking about the challenges of sharing data publicly. So I'm going to try to talk for about 40 minutes or so, giving us plenty of time for a robust discussion. And I'm really enthusiastic to hear from all of you. So let me just start by mentioning the problem that I study, which is language learning. Language learning is one of the key puzzles of cognitive science. Children go in just a few short years from speechless, wordless infants to toddlers who can use language to make their way through the world, to children who use language fluently to interact with the world and to learn from the knowledge and the communities around them. This is just an amazing transformation, and it's very common. It's essentially ubiquitous among typically developing children. And yet our theories of how this process unfolds are sadly lacking. So here's an example of what you might see in a child development textbook or a website about early language development. And what you see is a series of descriptions of children's behavior, summaries of stages that children go through, and so forth. Yet these kinds of summaries don't provide us with a mechanistic understanding of what's happening psychologically that drives this process forward. Of course, there are many such studies trying to understand these processes. That's the literature that I connect to and contribute to. But we don't have a mechanistic understanding that really summarizes these in a unifying theoretical framework. And that's very important stuff because early language lays the groundwork for children's success in school and in life more broadly. And so when we want to do early interventions, when we want to identify children at risk, when we want to provide remediation for children who have language delays or disorders, we need those theories to build smart interventions that have the best chance of success. So my research program is basically that. I try to build good theories of children's language learning using tools from statistics and from machine learning. And this is what I've been doing throughout my career. Been trying to make these kinds of quantitative theories that make predictions about children's behavior. And the specific domain of language learning that I look at is early word learning. Early word learning is this wonderful case study for all of a child's cognition because early word learning typically takes place in complex, interactive, grounded situations where you have a child and a caregiver interacting around many objects, playing, engaging in social routines, and so forth. And during that wonderful dance of play, children have to figure out, for example, that the word doggy refers to the stuffed dog that's in front of them and maybe other dogs, but not other stuffed animals. So this is a picture from my dissertation work where I created a statistical model of this kind of process. This model was a small machine learning artifact, a piece of code essentially, that claimed to summarize some of what we knew about this process of early word learning. It was essentially not a black box because we could look at the assumptions, we could look at the code, but maybe a gray box here, a learning model that instantiated a scientific hypothesis about learning. And I think this was a success, and several models that came after it were also successful in summarizing this literature in different ways and instantiating different scientific hypotheses about learning. But when we scratch under the surface of how this model is being trained and evaluated, it starts to look less good. I'm embarrassed to say that the predictors, the training data for this model was 20 minutes worth of annotated video, and it was annotated by me. So I took videos and I created a schematic coding scheme, and I went through and summarized which objects were present in the field of view of the child and what the mom was looking at and what the child was touching. And this was all just a symbolic code of some videos that were publicly available at the time. And when I evaluated this model, what I evaluated on was a handful of binary experimental results. So children at age 18 months do, whatever that means, perform above chance at this particular phenomenon. Or I tried to reproduce those general ages and stages descriptions of average developmental changes. And as I tried to move forward from this work and really elaborate it and create a more quantitative predictive framework with more data, I realized I had essentially run out of data. This is what happened when I started my first job as an assistant professor. I tried to extend this model and I just didn't have the data to look at what came next. Around this same time, there was a movement happening that made me really concerned also about the data that I was using. That was the open science movement. So here's some terminology from the open science movement. It's a broad movement about, sure, I don't have to tell you this, but it's about generally the role of transparency and verifiability in scientific progress. And so in this movement, people started to develop terminology for the different things that you might want from a particular claim in the literature. You might want it to be reproducible, which means if you had the data that was underlying that claim, say you had the open data from that paper, you could get the same numbers as were reported in the paper. You might also want, if it was an empirical claim, you might want it to be replicable. That is, you could actually get the materials, maybe remake them or get them from the author, and you could run the experiment again with a new sample from that same population, and you would get the same basic result. And of course, there's a lot of work being done by the word same here. So comparable results is always a question. And these two things, reproducibility and replicability, are prerequisites for the kind of theory evaluation that I was interested in doing. If the data sets you're trying to fit to, or the empirical results you're trying to fit to, are not reproducible or replicable, then you're really fitting your data to noise. Sorry, you're fitting your theory to noise. And of course, the eventual goal here is to create a generalizable theory, not just fitting to these particular observations, but to get a broad enough set of observations to really be able to summarize this process. And around this time, I started to get personally very, very worried about reproducibility and replicability. So just let me start with replicability, which was our first concern, that we might not be able to repeat many of the experiments that were present in this literature and get the same results. And this was starting to be a concern across all of psychology and really all across the biomedical sciences as well. So this is a summary of essentially 10 years worth of work on replicability. This is a complex graph, but I think it's an impactful one, so let me walk you through it. So what's being plotted on the horizontal axis here is the original effect size from a series of different independent experiments that were published in the literature. And on the vertical, you see the replication of the original effect size, with 0 being an exact replication. You get the same effect in the new experiment as you did in the old one, and that's exactly what you want. If you've got a big effect in the old one, you get a big effect in the new one, and small effect, and so forth. And each of these panels here shows a different large-scale replication study where 100 papers were selected, or 20 papers, or 94 papers were selected from the literature and replicated by independent teams. And what you see in essentially all of these large-scale studies is this negative trend, such that if you had a small effect in the original, you get a small effect in the replication. But if you had a large effect in the original, it tends to get a lot smaller. It's about half as big on average. So that's not good. The only panel where this is not the case is this particular study that tried to follow best practices throughout, including pre-registering all of their hypotheses and analyses ahead of time to avoid inflating their effect sizes. And sure enough, in that case, if you got they didn't get any large effects. So there's nothing over on this side of the graph, which is suspicious altogether. But when they got medium-sized effects in the original, they got medium-sized effects in the replication. The final feature of this graph that's a little distressing is these unfilled circles are replication failures in which the original result was statistically significant and the replication was not. And there are quite a lot of these across the different samples of studies to replicate. So, okay, I hope you see now how this is not the pattern of data you want on a graph like this. On a graph like this, you would want straight lines all across, and you'd want all the circles to be filled, and that's not what we see. We see a really fairly high rate of replication failure in the psychological literature more broadly, and that was very distressing to me as a theorist, because I was trying to make theories of these points, and maybe I was making theories of the magnitude or even the existence of an observation that actually was down here on the graph. And really, I shouldn't have spent any time trying to theorize about that at all because it was simply not replicable. So in other words, I started to feel like we were in bad shape for really evaluating these scientific hypotheses about learning. And that led me to the research program that I've been working on for the past 10 years, which is to try to do quantitative theory evaluation with more and better data. And in many cases, what I'm interested in is aggregating existing data to create more robust data sets to meet this need. All right, so I don't know if anybody on this talk has seen this movie, Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. It's a classic movie of the 80s. So I like to think of my data sharing journey as starting with the Field of Dreams model. So in Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner's character has this idea: if he builds a baseball diamond in the middle of his Iowa cornfield, people are going to come there to watch games, and he's going to be able to save his farm where the baseball field is. It's going to bring in the revenue that allows him to keep his family on this farm. And I began with the model that I think has been common for many folks in the data sharing field. If you build a compelling interface for data sharing, that's our baseball diamond in this Field of Dreams analogy, then researchers are going to dust off their files and deposit them in the repositories we build. They're going to drive out to that cornfield and come see the game, and it's going to be glorious. So let me tell you about this journey. There are 3 theses to this talk. The first thesis is that mandates for data sharing are a start, but they really aren't enough to make people come visit the cornfield. The second is that one model for moving forward is to create domain-specific data repositories. And I suspect this should resonate with members of the current community. And these domain-specific data repositories should store data, not just in general, but data about theoretically relevant constructs for that particular field and that set of scientific questions. And then my hope here that I'm going to try to argue for is that these repositories themselves create incentives to change the data sharing process that are as powerful as the kind of mandates that we might have initially started with from a policy perspective. Okay, let me take you on this journey. So as people started to get interested in issues of replicability and reproducibility, and really when I say interested here, I mean worried, there were a whole host of policy responses. One was the Transparency and Openness Promotion Guidelines, which was a set of policies for journals. And I think these have had generally a very positive impact, providing a policy template for what journals should say about publishing data, about publishing code, about pre-registration, and so forth. And I was very interested at this time around 2014, 2015 in what these policies did. And I got an opportunity to see up close and personal because I was invited to be an associate editor, screening papers and getting editorial decisions for a journal called Cognition, which has a long and storied history in our field. It's a wonderful journal, it's a disciplinary journal, but it has been really at the forefront of publishing a lot of interesting work on the nature of the mind. And I got this opportunity in part because a guy named Steve Sloman took over as editor-in-chief of the journal. And Steve, being a wonderful contrarian, said, I don't hold with all this stuff that's outside our field, talking about data sharing. I'm not really interested in, these kind of big policy initiatives. I'm just going to mandate data sharing from the start because it's just the right thing to do. And so he said, I'm just going to institute this data transparency policy, and authors of all published papers will be asked to make their data publicly available. You just have to archive on acceptance. And in some sense, coming in 2015, 2014, this was pretty progressive and exciting that he would just mandate this for everyone. And I was really interested in what this policy did and how the mandate operated. So I had the good fortune at that time to work with a wonderful postdoc and meta scientist named Tom Hardwick, who assembled a very large team, actually twice in a row, to evaluate this kind of journal policy intervention. So I'll tell you about the first one primarily. So he got together lots of folks who were interested in this issue in order to take on the mammoth task of looking at policy compliance in articles in Cognition before and after the policy went into place. And this creates really the first systematic case study of what's called analytic reproducibility, getting the same numbers from raw data sets as are in the published paper. And then this isn't the first one across all fields, but I think it's the first one in psychology specifically. So here's what actually happened. So what's being plotted here on the horizontal is time, and the policy was put in place in March 2015, and we coded about a year and a half worth of post-policy data, as well as several years pre-policy. And what we coded, first of all, was the proportion of articles with a data availability statement. So what you see is pre-policy, you do not have a lot of articles with a data availability statement, although there is an upward trend. But after the policy, you see this pretty quick rise up. So that from pre-policy, it's about 22%. After the policy, the numbers are going up. But when we dug more deeply into these data sets, not all of them were actually really reusable. That is, there were data missing, there were incomplete metadata, and so forth. So post-policy, we had about 63% reusability. So even though the policy really did have a causal, we believe a causal impact, as shown in part by this discontinuity in the regression line, we're still only getting about 2/3 of the data being reusable. And that's a problem for policy compliance. It really suggested to us, as we communicated back to the journal, that you needed more review of the data sets, you needed better guidelines around the metadata, and generally you needed to work towards better policy compliance in order to actually have these policies produce uniform outcomes. So this was, I think, an interesting evaluation, but what was maybe a little bit more unique about this study was that we actually then took a random sample of these reusable data sets, downloaded them, and then actually tried to reproduce the conclusions in the published paper. And this was very labor-intensive work. That explains why the team for this paper was so big, because these are like wonderful data crossword puzzles. You download the data, and then you have to try to reassemble from the puzzle of the instructions, the clues given in the paper, what the actual numbers were. And what we found for 35 of these in the cognition study and 25 of them in a later study of psychological science, another journal with an open data type policy, we found that only 1/3 of these papers were analytically reproducible from the actual raw data downloaded that were marked as reusable. So in only 1/3 of cases could we reproduce all the numbers in a published analysis. And this was just one analysis in a paper that sometimes had many, many different analyses. So it was essentially one paragraph of the results section. So we found this very dispiriting, but we didn't stop there. We reached out to the original authors for these papers, and we got a very good author response rate. And even with the help of the original authors, we could only track down every single number in about 2/3 of cases. And this was true across these two independent samples. What went wrong here? Well, in these cases, we saw many, many, many numerical issues throughout the analytic pipeline. These were not complex analyses. These were often issues in simple reporting, for example, typos, or issues in reporting a confidence interval and what formula was used, or issues in the data exclusion pipeline resulting in minor numerical differences. In no cases here, reproducibility issues led to serious undermining of the substantive conclusions, but there were 3 cases that were unclear where authors did commit to publishing an erratum on their paper, which is quite a high rate of errata, of corrections based on this study. But really, from the perspective of somebody trying to reuse these data, it meant that open data were not really reusable. We couldn't really just go from these open data sets to interesting new model-based analyses. It took 5 to 25 person hours for each study in this paper. So times 35 to try to get a sense of whether we could really get the numbers out. I had a particularly graphic analogy that Tom liked to use. He said that this is these puzzles of reproducing people's analytic conclusions from their data was like putting together flat pack furniture with just a vague set of verbal instructions. Yeah, put the screws in the corner. Okay, now snap the whole thing together. And as anybody who's shopped at IKEA knows, without very careful adherence to very strict directions, the exercise often ends in disaster. Okay, so what's the way forward? For me, this came through thinking about domain-specific data repositories. And so I'll tell you a bit about that now. So the world of open data is broad, and there are many amazing resources out there: Figshare, the Open Science Framework, the Dataverse Project, Databrary, which I'll mention a bit later. These are amazing resources, but they store completely unstructured data from a zillion different projects with no metadata standards. There's no way to just say, hey, what are these data about? The answer is they're about everything. They're about all the different constructs and theories and measurements that people in psychology and more broadly in the behavioral sciences are interested in. So how do we use these data for specific theoretical goals? Let's start from our theory of language learning. It turns out that the data that people care about in language learning are structured around a shared theory, which is a vague theory, but it's a really, nevertheless, a very influential framework. And the framework is that children get what's called language input. Some of that input is child-directed and some is overheard. And then that input is processed in the moment through a variety of psychological processes of inference, prediction, so that the child can interpret it in the moment. And that leads to the accretion of knowledge about the language, which lets them comprehend and produce language, showing evidence of their learning. So psychological theories like this help us make sense of the relationship between different measurements that we make. And in this case, we do a lot of measuring of language input. We do a lot of measuring of processing and a lot of measuring of learning. And so what I've been doing is building resources around each of these. So for the measurement of language input, we have video corpora and transcript corpora. These are sets of interactions that children and their caregivers have gone into that can be used as input data for models. We have a repository of children's language processing, and that's called PeakBank, reflecting it's archiving the gaze of many different children on different stimuli and the automatic eye tracking that people have done in my field. And then we have a corpus of children's learning outcomes called WordBank, which is really our flagship project that I'll tell you about in just a moment. But before I do that, I just want to make one mention again of open science here. So open science is often thought of just around transparency and verifiability as ways of trying to make sure that the scientific literature is bedrock solid. Right. I talked about it. Okay, we want to share data so that we can figure out where numbers in a paper come from so we can reproduce them and so forth. And that's really a sense of open science almost as a stick rather than a carrot, that open science is all about making sure that you're in compliance with the policy. But I don't think that's where the benefits of transparency stop. In fact, I think open science is a key approach that enables faster research progress, that as we use transparent methods and we store data together, we actually enable faster research, we enable discovery, we enable pooling of information to really push our fields forward. And so I think in order to make a culture shift towards open science, we have to show people the exciting things that can happen when data are open. And these projects that I'm about to show you are my attempt to do that. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge the very good antecedents for open data sharing in the field of child language. So this is CHILDIS or CHILDS. It's the Child Language Data Exchange System. And this is the granddaddy original big data for child language. So well before anybody was talking about big data in other fields, well before the current move to open science, Brian McWhinney and his collaborators who built CHILDIS were exchanging all of the available transcripts. These are kind of written transcripts of children's speech and caregiver speech to children in an open research environment with open tools and resources. So essentially, this made a model where everybody in child language, when they take tape recordings of a child playing with their caregiver and transcribe them and analyze those for a particular reason in their PhD thesis, they then contribute those transcripts to Childis, and that becomes part of the impact of their work. And so I think this is just an incredible antecedent for our field that suggests that collaboration can really drive research forward. In my work, I've focused on a second wonderful antecedent, which also actually had a tradition of data sharing and material sharing. And this is an instrument called the MacArthur Bates Communicative Development Inventory. That's a mouthful, so we call it the CDI. The CDI is very simple. We call it an instrument, but it's really, like a microscope or something, but it's just a survey. And this is a survey that we give to parents where they bubble in what words their child says, or in some cases, what words their child says and understands. So they go through the 680 words on this form, and they bubble in, does your child know alligator? Do they say alligator? Do they say animal? Do they say ant? And so forth, all the way through zebra, and then onward through other different categories of words. These surveys, it turns out, are surprisingly useful for child language. They are reliable and valid ways to measure a very young child's language. And they're very cheap to administer because you just have to email them or mail them to the caregivers and then score them when they're filled in. That provides, in turn, a really nice screening mechanism for identifying early language disorders. It provides a nice way of measuring children's language skills before they come into the lab, and so forth. And because they're cheap, easy, and reliable, they've been a really important part of the toolkit for child language researchers around the world. And so tremendous amounts of effort has actually gone into adapting these instruments for different languages. When I started thinking about how to evaluate my models of early language learning, these data naturally came to mind. I started thinking, wow, this is a really amazing opportunity. And so around 2014, my collaborators and I got together and planned a site called WordBank. The idea with WordBank was that this would be an open database of children's vocabulary development, where we'd archive CDI data from around the world, from whoever would give them to us, and we'd allow those data to be downloaded and manipulated in a uniform format so that they could be in turn used as a way of evaluating models. We started this project out, and we were very happy to get a set of data contributions from a variety of authors. You can see Norwegian data were very well represented in the early data set, English, Danish, Turkish, and so forth. We call this figure the snail, reflects the diversity of languages in the data set. By 2019, we were up to 75,000 children with more than 29 languages or dialects. And we just pushed out a new revision to the site this summer, actually, including data from children with language disorders, including bilinguals, and now including 40 languages or dialects. So there's plenty of work to do to increase the linguistic diversity of the cultures and languages that are represented here. In particular, we're very heavy on Indo-European languages compared with other language families around the world, but we're definitely the most definitive cross-linguistic resource for learning about children's early vocabulary and early language outcomes. And when I show this figure, I don't often highlight where each of these data sets come from, but really fundamentally, this wasn't a case of Field of Dreams where people just showed up and gave us data. Instead, we have as a team a spreadsheet of people that I email and beg and plead with to try to share their data, to talk about the different data sharing norms and what they themselves can get from sharing data from this repository. So for example, this little dot here for the American Sign Language data set, it's a wonderful, rich data set that tells us about visual language acquisition. That's a set of paper forms that I picked up from somebody's driveway in the East Bay. So I drove kind of an hour and a half, and they agreed to deposit the data from their thesis in WordBank, and they left a pile of papers in a paper sack on their doorstep. And we digitized those and put them in the database. There were some permissions issues around Parisian French CDIs, a wonderful team, but they were trying to navigate different adaptation issues and different privacy issues. And so on a Paris trip in 2017, we worked that out. The Korean data set came from a family trip where my family and I went to visit the originator of the Korean CDI adaptation in Seoul, and so forth and so on. So each of these data sets has a story behind it. And through this process, we came to realize the importance of proper licensing and citation norms. So here are our licensing and citation policies. We make it clear that somebody who's publishing or presenting on WordBank needs to cite the publications linked to the data set. You also need to cite the database itself. We've got a policy if you're using every single data set or more than 5 data sets, then there's kind of a courtesy case if you have space limitations. We also, as a result of some authors' interests, we use a CC non-commercial license for some data sets where we just have CC with attribution, CC BY for others. And we now have a versioning policy where you get date of download information when you pull in the data set. And so on this page, you then see the attribution information for every single data set. And when you download a data set, it comes with that attribution information. And this has become critical for us as we make the case that folks really need to think about the impact of their data collection when they do CDI data collection. And by giving their data to us, they can actually increase the impact of their own work. That it's not a service to us to share with WordBank, it's a service to them because that increases their visibility and impact. They can show that to their funders, they can show that to their colleagues and say, hey, look, I'm part of this international team and I'm getting citation and credit through that process. But of course, the fun thing about creating a data resource for me is that you can then play with it. And so one of the things that we did with WordBank, taking advantage of the new R Shiny ecosystem that was coming out at that time. This is a set of tools for creating web-based data visualization apps. We created a set of interactive exploration tools. So here's an example of what you can do. This is kind of online exploration. So here we're selecting from our list of languages. We'd say we take German. So we see the size of the child's vocabulary by their age. We can split it up by different variables like gender. Maybe just look at a simple summary statistic like the median. And there we see a female advantage in the learning of German. So is that true in Korean? Well, it turns out it is. The red line is above the blue line again. And maybe we look at Swedish as another language. And again, we see different data, but the same female advantage. So this kind of interactive exploration can be very powerful for trying to form hypotheses about children's language, generally see cross-linguistic differences. And we're very encouraged to see that a lot of labs that study child language actually use this in their teaching. So they create interactive exercises around the use of WordBank. These interactives are very convenient and very useful, but they're part of and built on a broader principle, which is easy API or application programming interface access to the data set. So a key principle of WordBank has been to create an R programming interface where people can pull in the data quickly as part of a computational pipeline that's reproducible. And this is documented as a package called WordBanker, where you can pull in data through simple calls like get administration data, get instrument data, get language data, and so forth. And so this allows you then to manipulate the data. And indeed, that's very much what we've done with them, kind of going through the basic data science and modeling pipeline to try to understand cross-linguistic variation in children's language learning. And if this were a different talk, I'd then launch into a long description of some of the cross-linguistic principles of language learning that we've discovered from this data set. And if folks are interested in that, I'd love to share some of that work. But since this is primarily a talk about resources, I'll move on and come back to Kevin Costner and Field of Dreams. So the lesson of WordBank in some sense has been, if you build it, they'll eventually come, maybe with a bunch of traveling and trips and guidance about data sharing and policy and so forth. But so let's continue thinking about kind of different use cases here of how we might create these different domain-specific repositories. So going back to Childis, our original big data, this is a second data set resource that we were very interested in. And so a second project that we pursued here was actually to try to take this original big data set and put it in the same kind of interface. So we created a site called ChildisDB, which is a flexible, reproducible interface to Childis that has exactly the same tools, an API for pulling in data from Childis in a reproducible, versioned way into R or Python workflows. So you don't have to download the data set from the website, parse the format and so forth. You can just pull it directly in a pre-parsed reproducible way. And then building on that, a set of interactive visualizations. So similarly, the kind of web-based interface where you could interact with and play with the data sets. And so this kind of parasitic secondary API was a fun extension of our work with WordBank, where we were trying to say, okay, here's a different data format. Can we do the same kind of thing? Can we create a useful interface that allows students and that allows more sophisticated researchers to pull in the data? So both of these data sets have something in common, which is that they're very easy to work with. We started with easy stuff, survey data or transcript text data. These are relatively straightforward formats, and although the data in childless is big by some senses, it's not that big by the sense of modern natural language processing. We're talking about millions of words, not hundreds of millions of words. In contrast, when you look at children's early interactions, you might not just want transcripts, you might actually want a video recording of the children's life. And so we've been very interested in moving beyond just pure text data to try to work with video data. And that raises a whole host of other challenges. So I'll just tell you briefly about one project that we did trying to overcome those challenges. That project was to take a method that had been developed in the literature, which is the head-mounted camera method. So we developed our own head-mounted camera device, which is basically a camping headlamp with a little kind of matchbook camera and a fisheye lens, aftermarket iPhone fisheye lens. This is our old version of the device. We've got a cool new version that's going to come out soon. But this is the one we used for the SACAM dataset, where we distributed this to 3 households around the world. These are 3 developmental psychologists who were interested in doing this fairly onerous data collection effort, where they collected 2 hours a week of video from when their child was 6 months old to 30 months old. And you can see the kind of cuteness journey that one of these children in the data set went through. And this effort yielded more than 400 hours of video, which is, if you're keeping score, it's about 8% of the waking hours for a single year of the child's life. So this video data set then is something very different. You can't just play around with them in real time. This is a lot of video data. And so we needed to share this in a special purpose video repository. For this, we chose the Databrary repository of Rick Gilmore and Karen Adolph. This is a sort of developmental psychology specific project from NYU and Penn State that created a video sharing library. The key thing about Databrary from our perspective was that it has a very nice format where it has good privacy restrictions, such that everything in Databrary requires an institutional agreement for a login and access. So in order to access Databrary, you need to have your institution sign a terms of service that restricts cross-posting, de-identification, or re-identification, and so forth. So there are some access controls, but then once the institutional agreement is signed, you have free access to a lot of data sets, including ours, along with structured metadata about the children and about the observation sessions. So this is a nice case where we've got a domain-specific data repository that's specific for developmental videos and allows access, and I think nicely splits the difference between privacy and accessibility for our purposes. And so we're using Databrary for our new, larger egocentric video data set moving forward as well. Okay, I couldn't help but give you a little sense of some of these data. They're very noisy and very unstructured, but the world looks very different to a little kid than does to an adult. And these videos have been really instrumental through the work of a variety of different labs around the world, not just mine, in revealing some of the dynamics of children's world. So objects impinge much more closely on children's visual environment because their arms are so short. To interact with things, they really actually need to be closer to them. And they're, of course, closer to the floor. And often then the hands of the caregivers around them come in from the sides to really show them what's going on. They're, of course, closer to pets and so forth. And so they're not seeing a lot of their caregivers' faces. Instead, they're really seeing the world in a different way. So I think this is a fun, exciting methodology that really reveals something about a children's viewpoint. And critically, creating data sets like SACAM allow others to reuse these data, often in machine learning and artificial intelligence, to draw new conclusions about human learning. Okay, the final data set I want to tell you about indexes children's processing. So the process of interpreting data in real time, interpreting a language in real time that children go through as they learn about the world. And the key method for studying this was developed by my old mentor, Anne Fernald. It's called the looking while listening method. A very simple, very elegant method where you put a child in the lab, often in their caregiver's lap, and you show them pictures of, say, two objects like a cookie and a book, and you say, where's the cookie? Can you find the cookie? And then you monitor their eye movements either automatically or sometimes earlier on by hand to try to understand how their eye movements reflect their knowledge. And what you find across many, many studies with many different populations is that starting at the 0 point, when you hear that word or you see the sign, in this case, this is data from a sign language study where you see the sign for the target word, the looking to the target goes up. And it goes up very fast for adults. Before the sign or the word is even done, the adults are looking at the correct target. It's about 80% of the time. For children, for older children, it goes up relatively quickly. And for younger children, it eventually, after the sign or the word is over, gets up above chance levels of 50% to something like 60, 70%. And so this is a very, very robust set of findings with parallel results with diverse populations in the US and abroad. You get Spanish and English speakers, low and high SES, late talkers, children born premature, bilinguals, children learning ASL, and so forth. So this has really become another of these gold standard paradigms that people use in our field to measure early language. So maybe it will come as no surprise that our goal was to create, again, a flexible, reproducible interface to try to pull together data sets using this specific method, measuring this specific construct, language processing, and to make the data from all the labs around the world available to people who are interested in these kinds of data. So we created PeakBank, but these data are much more complex than the survey data or the transcript data that we had worked with. In fact, one of the things that really came out of this project was that we needed to create a complex database schema, an ontology to try to organize these data. And we had ontologies before, but they were much simpler. Really, they didn't bear a lot of discussion. Here, a key locus for our design process was figuring out the database schema. We had data sets and then administrations of for individual and then subjects who were sometimes had multiple administrations in a longitudinal study, stimuli, like a word image pairing, like ball and or a cookie and book, trial types, locations on the screen, and all of these combined to give us the moment-by-moment time course of where the child was looking at any given millisecond in the experiment. So this is a larger, much more complex data set, and it required much more effort and much more design to try to create a pipeline from the raw data sets from labs around the world through the import and validation process to this common format, this 9-table database, which we call the PeakBank database, and then the outputs from the API to download the data for research and the visualization packages for exploring the data in real time. And so this was a much more labor-intensive project that proceeded over the course, first before the pandemic and then during the pandemic, with regular hackathons in person and on Zoom, lots of folks contributing to this and really putting this project together over the course of many, many years and hours. And the result is that we can take a uniform approach to all of those scattered different curves, like the one I showed you in the previous slide. So this is now about 20 odd data sets summarized, and you can see that same word recognition curve that I showed across different data sets with different degrees of variability, different populations, languages, and so forth. And this data set and database really allows us actually to do something that I was very excited about from the very beginning of our work, namely instant reproducibility. So rather than relying on that 5 to 25 hours, that IKEA flat pack approach of, okay, if I can even get the data set, I have to download it and do the same thing that they did, and I'm not exactly sure what they did. With PeakBank, if an author has deposited their data in this repository, we can very, very easily, within just a couple of lines of code, reproduce their analysis And so this is just a figure from our Peak Bank paper where we show that a classic paper in this literature from 2002, we could just pull in the data in a couple lines of code and plot the different trajectories, the different word recognition curves for correct and mispronounced words for very young children here. So this is just one classic result from our literature that we were able to reproduce with essentially no fuss or bother in just a couple of minutes, really cutting down the burden on the analyst of figuring out what was done in that previous paper, how the data were processed, and so forth. Okay, so the model I've argued for is this model of a domain-specific data repository. It's a repository that doesn't just put together data, it indexes data corresponding to specific theoretical entities in your theory of language acquisition or whatever your scientific domain is. These repositories need to have good policies to encourage contribution. They need to have good tools to allow you to import data from all the different formats of labs around the world. And they need good APIs for making access easy so that researchers can pull in those data for all the different applications they want to create. And overall, and maybe I didn't stress this enough, integration into the research community that you're trying to serve is then, of course, critical. So we're going to conferences, going to workshops, teaching people to use these data, teaching people to format and contribute their data, and then to use the data that come out. And that's a key part of this, which is education about the use of these repositories and how they can enable research. So my conviction is that data are key drivers of theory development. And policy mandates are very important. There's been some wonderful moves on that side. But just telling people to deposit their data is not enough. The data that you get are not complete or reproducible in many, many cases. So these sorts of community-led domain-specific data repositories can catalyze community standards and support theory building. And so that's the goal, is to create that field of dreams, to build these kinds of resources and to have communities catalyze around sharing the data to accelerate progress. Thank you very much. So we have a little bit of time now. I would love to take questions, discussion, clarification, and so forth. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand or to write into the Q&A.
I have a question, actually. So this is, it's in regards to like building out these like domain specific tools to work with the data, which actually I think makes a lot of sense. But how well do you think you need like a specialist repository on the backside, or do you think it's possible to pull data from a bunch of like diverse repositories, like maybe, because maybe initially data is bootstrapped and just stuck anywhere, and then, you know, do you understand? Like,
I do, and so if you think that the end goal is to have an API that says, hey, you as the scientist or engineer, you want this kind of data to come into your pipeline, and you want to know what version it is and where it came from and a bunch of the details about it in just a single API call, right? That's like kind of the dream. And the question is, what sort of infrastructure do you need to realize that dream? So I've shown you these projects that are really maybe the heaviest weight version of that, where you build something from scratch. There's a lot of hand engineering. There's a lot of thought by domain scientists about the ontology that you really want to have. But once you do that 3 or 4 times, which we've now done, you start to wonder, well, do I need to do that whole process from scratch every single time? Is there a way, as you say, to bootstrap that process? And that's very much what we've been thinking about is, you know, what are the shared features of these repositories? And are there ways to, you know, have them back end out into more generic systems? What would be the metadata requirements for these more generic systems, such that we could then be kind of using them as the storage backend, but providing domain-specific access through our API and through a set of shared guarantees about what the data represent and how they've been vetted and so forth. And so that's still ongoing work, but I think we're really thinking about what sort of abstraction layers for repositories could we provide. And that's one reason why I was excited to learn about Samvera and some of the things that your community is doing to try to build at least analogous tools, if not the same kinds of tools.
So I have a question. This is Carolyn. Sorry, I can't use the Q&A because I'm a panelist later. But so I had a question about, I think you made a joke about, begging people to contribute. So I feel like that's a common challenge that librarians might have too for general repositories. So do you think, I guess my question is, do you think the education piece that you were talking about in terms of encouraging contributions and letting people know about about tools for importing data, and do you think that should be part and parcel of graduate education, and has it been in your experience?
Yeah, it absolutely should be. And I don't think it is. So there's a set of prerequisite grounding that we do sort of more and more in our graduate education now. And I've been, another hat that I wear is to do methods instruction for our incoming graduate students in the psychology program. And since I started doing that, more and more of our graduate students coming in are educated about programmatic data analysis and best practices in data sharing and data storage, project management. And once you do that, I think it becomes much more natural to say, oh, okay, is there a shared version of this that goes beyond the single project organization? And so then I think you have folks who are open to that kind of education. But right now, from my work, what I do is I go to specific kind of language development or child development conferences, and I try to teach the use of these tools. And that takes time. And that educational piece is really an important part of culture shifts. It's like, okay, not only is this a policy that the NIH or the NSF says I have to follow, or my journal says I have to follow it, this is actually something that my community does, that the culture says, okay, this is a good thing to do. And so that, that culture shift, I think, is really, really important and requires a kind of combination of education and role modeling that takes a lot longer and is a lot more on the ground. Requires those visits to conferences, it requires those workshops, the one-on-one instruction, and so forth. Okay, so I've got a question from the Q&A from Esme Cowles. Do these kind of repository standards have an impact on how people collect, organize, and analyze their data? Great question. So my hope is that these standards have both direct impacts and knock-on impacts. The direct impacts are that we hope that folks are planning for, when they use these measures, they're planning for contribution. And that's going to lead them then to kind of look at our standards and think, well, what metadata do I need to be retaining about this work that I'm doing? So maybe it's too much to ask that they would use our data standards from the beginning, but to think about our templates in their planning process, that I do hope. Then the knock-on effects that I'm really hoping for is that folks look at the kinds of work that we've done on the ontology of particular constructs, and they generalize that to their constructs. And they say, oh, okay, look, I don't collect eye movements about language. I collect eye movements about this other domain. And so I'm going to use your eye movement standard to organize and analyze our data and to, adapt your tools. And I think we have one example where that has been the case, and it was very exciting for me, where our repository structure got taken essentially whole hog and used in a completely different domain. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a nice open source moment where somebody forks our repository and puts a different kind of thing in it and a different brand and a different idea, but the infrastructure has been provided by taking our template. So that was very exciting for me. Okay, another question from the Q&A from Hannah Frost. Is long-term preservation a concern for researcher communities? Many of us work in libraries and we talk a lot about and sometimes spend a lot of resources on data preservation. How can we help researchers with preservation? Is it as important to you as it is to us? Absolutely. So Hannah, it's a really great question. And this is what happens when researchers walk into librarians' territory, right? So we really don't have the kind of preservation plan that we would like for these data sets. And that's something that we, as they become established, it's like when you're starting it out, you don't think, oh, who would want to preserve this for, all eternity or even for more than 5 years. But as the data set and the database become part of the community culture, and you start to get floods of annoyed emails when the data set is not available because of some outage, this becomes much more of a concern. So our preservation plan has to be somewhat better than, well, we put it in an AWS bucket, and as long as there's money on the credit card, we can keep that bucket open, right? So I do think that and your question is prompting me to think more so that we're at the point where we need to really partner with librarians to think about long-term preservation plans. Some of the generic data repositories like the Open Science Framework, Dataverse, they really built those preservation resources in from the beginning. And one of the things about being a kind of a scrappier, bootstrapped resource like some of ours is that we didn't build that in from the beginning. So it's work that we're really going to need to do, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Okay, another question from Hannah. So with the recent OSTP memo, read data sharing of federally funded research, do you hear more researchers talking about data management and archiving, metadata, code, et cetera? How can we help with educating and supporting researchers in this way? Great. So yes, the memo has been very, very helpful in catalyzing these discussions. It's a big deal that we're seeing much more federal attention to data sharing and to open access. And I'm very, very excited about that. And the question is what kind of work we can do in order to make this kind of stuff most successful. So I guess I'll start with my kind of public example of a case that really did not go well from my perspective, and that's the NIH Data Archive. So NIH started mandating for a number of institutes and for a number of data set types that all data needed to be archived regularly from ongoing projects in this NIH Data Archive, which is an interesting combination. It is a generic data repository that tries to put specific ontological assumptions on the data by allowing you to create, okay, this is a measure type, and this is a demographic type, and okay, so we can really kind of expand the matrix of what sorts of measures and what sorts of observations we can put in. So there's a kind of complex ontology behind that data archive, and our uses of the data in there suggest that it is overly complex and poorly designed, and that really it's not possible to well, I don't know if it's not possible, but it's very hard to get compliance, and it's very hard to reuse the data when people in principle comply, because in practice what they're depositing is kind of the minimal product. It's not something they're proud of. It's not something that's easily harmonizable with other data sets in the database and so forth. So that was a mandate that was rolled out without enough thought, enough funding, enough training, and enough design work. And I'm hoping that we are now, as communities, more educated, and that the allowance of data shared resources and budgets helps researchers kind of really take seriously the fact that these are challenges that they need to work on more intensively. So yeah, to the extent that librarians, especially in institutional contexts, can reach out and remind folks that you have unique and specific expertise in data management and metadata provisioning, in design of these sorts of schemes, I think that would be very exciting. And so yeah, in some sense, maybe what's needed is just a reminder to folks on the research end that, hey, there's a field that knows how to do this, and it's not your field; it's the library science field that really has the expertise to try to guide this transition to a much more open ecosystem.
Michael, thank you so much. That was excellent. We really appreciate it, giving us a lot to think about today.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to connect and to learn more about your community.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll resume at 20 after the hour, so 12:20 Eastern time, and we'll have our State of Samvera talk. All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm going to turn things over now to Carolyn for the state of Samvera.
Hi, Heather, you can hear me, right?
I can, yep.
Oh, great. Okay. Welcome everyone to Samvera Connect 2022. A big thank you to Dr. Michael Frank. That was really great talk about how specific repositories have played a role in the research and making data reproducible. I'm Carolyn Casey, and I am talking to you today from the Northwestern University campus, which sits on the traditional homelands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa. I'm here to present the state of Samvera on behalf of the Samvera board. First of all, thank you to the programming committee. If you remember, we had to pivot from planning an in-person conference at Notre Dame to a virtual one. So thank you to Notre Dame and to the board for working through a difficult decision to move the conference online. Samvera, I'd like to start this year's State of Samvera talk with a reminder about Samvera's vision statement listed here on the slide. The last few years of progress in Samvera has been very focused on a few facets of sustaining Samvera. From the governance changes 4 years ago, including a fully elected board and hiring centralized staff, to resources, including annual dues for partnership and annual budgeting, to community building with Heather Greer-Klein at the helm. This past year, much of our focus has been on our software development, planning, and practices, and how our software will serve the needs of the future, will serve future needs of our community. My challenge to all of you going forward is to keep this focus so that Samvera is looked to for its best-in-class solutions. To this end, what did we do this year in regards to honing in on our software? I'm going to go through a few examples now. First, Heather had the awesome idea to create a technology maintenance pledge after listening to the community's frustrations about how we were doing community sprints and planning for upcoming work. This approach allowed institutions to better plan when they could commit staff time to working on Samvera's much needed maintenance across a myriad of applications. Our goal of 2,000 hours was far exceeded with 3,300 hours pledged. That is the equivalent of almost 2 full-time staff devoted to maintaining our software. We were able to upgrade both Hyrax and Avalon to Rails 6, Blacklight 7, and Bootstrap 4. We made significant improvements to analytics for collections and works in Hyrax, and we cleared out a significant backlog of maintenance issues. And in looking at our GitHub repos, I think this approach to maintenance and having a pledge drive really paid off. We had 71 individual contributors this year, as opposed to 35 last year. And we doubled our number of contributing institutions from 14 to 28. Another example in how we focused on our technology is that the board sent a proposal to partners to ask them to use community funds to reimburse a partner institution for part of a developer's salary for the Hyrax tech lead role. The Roadmaps Alignment Group recommended this funding as a 1-year pilot and as an alternative to funding the broader technical role that was outlined in the 2018 governance recommendations. The group had come to the conclusion that a broader technical role could not be as effective when Hyrax development is without stable technical leadership. Hyrax is currently in use at over 20 partner institutions, and the community acknowledges that past volunteers in the Hyrax technical lead role found the position to be challenging and likely to cause burnout. After approval from the partners to dip into our cash reserves, we were able to welcome Daniel Pierce from Indiana University to the role in July. This approach will be evaluated in this spring to determine a path for sustainability and to determine the focus for the role, whether it be broader or whether it will continue to focus solely on Hyrax. And side note, I'm going to report on this a little later on this talk, but we did exceed some of our income this year, or our anticipated income. So we actually didn't hit our cash reserves as much as anticipated. In terms of HYRAX, we did meet some milestones this year. I already mentioned there was upgrades for Rails, Blacklight, and Bootstrap. And we actually got to beta 2 for HYRAX 4.0, which means we almost have an MVP for HYRAX using Postgres as a backend. We're really, really excited about this work. Other noteworthy releases this year includes updates to Avalon, Haiku, and Valkyrie. So be sure to also check out Samvera Labs for upcoming components and tooling for your repositories. A third example in the area of technology where we made some progress is that the board decided to no longer require contributor license agreements from individuals or institutions to contribute to Samvera technologies. Rather, we now rely on the protections already included in the Apache 2 license and in the GitHub license agreement to meet the same legal protection needs. Thanks to our fiscal sponsor, Oasis Open, Heather was able to discuss and confirm this approach with legal counsel experienced in open source licensing. This elimination of CLAs allows for a more efficient and friendlier contribution process and demonstrates that Samvera is committed to ensuring participation is easy and that the community is welcoming. Now we're looking at what comes next for Samvera software. Throughout 2022, the Samvera board and community leaders piloted a series of activities that are included in the It Takes a Village toolkit that was created as part of an IMLS grant managed by Lyrasis. We found these activities to be invaluable strategic planning tools, and you can learn more about that experience on Thursday when there is a presentation about the toolkit activities. One of these activities, we had technology stakeholders from across the community meet, and that we were able to prioritize some goals from it for this next year. Partners recently discussed these goals and gave them the thumbs up. So our goals for 2023 are listed here on the slide. We will conduct a technical analysis of HYRAX in order to define priority actions and a roadmap towards simplification of software requirements, reduction of further technical debt. We got a lot done this year, and making HYRAX easier to sustain. Our second goal is to engage with non-contributing implementer institutions to gather information on reducing their barriers or obstacles to contribution or other inhibitors to community participation and joining as partners. We may also be able to gather some information from folks who are leaving the community to just get their thoughts on how to make the community better. Actions for enacting mechanisms to address these issues will also be created. And then the third lofty goal is to analyze needs for technical documentation and end user guidelines across Samvera products. Perhaps we'll just take a few specific ones and build a proposed process for facilitating regular documentation and guide creation. We're excited to accomplish all the work in these goals in the year ahead, and there will be opportunities to participate. In fact, there is a birds of a feather conversation happening on Thursday to discuss and refine some additional, more specific technology ideas to pursue in the near future, and you're welcome to join that conversation as well. So now I'm going to hand things off to Heather for a brief update about the community this year.
Thanks, Carolyn. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I am happy to report that the community is going strong. To date, we have 33 partners and over 70 known Samvera technology adopters. We have over 1,200 active members of the Samvera Slack workspace, and we have 11 active working and interest groups, although we had some that opened up this year and closed this year having completed their goals. Virtual conferences give us an opportunity to reach even more current and potential community participants. So once again this year, we have over 200 unique attendees for Samvera Connect. And our hope is that in 2023, we'll be able to hold our usual virtual Connect in the spring and then an in-person event in the fall. So watch for more details about that early in the new year. So one of the things that makes our community special is our partnership model, where we invite organizations who are already invested in Samvera to become a partner. Anyone in the community can recommend an organization for partnership, and we are thrilled to welcome El Colegio de Mexico to our partner community this year. They represent our first Latin American partner and have already made a huge impact with their participation in partner calls. They're also part of the planning committee for this event. It had some great ideas. And any institution interested in learning more about partnership, please definitely reach out to me for a conversation. Another part of what makes us so successful as a community is our working in interest groups. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our group framework, it was developed to provide a lightweight way to create groups to accomplish work or to come together and discuss shared experiences. So criteria for creating interest in working groups are listed on our Samvera wiki, and we encourage folks to engage in existing groups or to develop new ones when the need arises. And a number of these interest and working groups are going to be reporting out during our time together at Connect. I'd like to invite everyone to attend and learn more about the important works of these groups. They're short updates, but it will give you an idea of a group you might like to be involved with, because these groups are the heart and hands of our community. We had 5 developer congresses and 2 community efforts this past year, mainly focused on onboarding new developers, upgrading dependencies, and integrating Valkyrie technology into Hyrax. These efforts are an ideal time for developers and technologists at any experience level to work together toward community development priorities. So our next developer congress has already been scheduled. It's going to be in late January, and you can sign up now on the Samvera wiki. The developer congresses and community maintenance efforts could not happen without the volunteer leaders who steward our technology. These leaders work together in the roadmaps alignment group to make sure we're always planning and communicating across technologies. So these are current product owners, John Cameron from Indiana University, Rob Kaufman from Software Services by Scientist.com, Julie Hardesty from Indiana University, and Rebecca Cotti, the incoming Hyrax product manager, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Valkyrie product owner, Alex Dunn from the University of California, Santa Barbara. And here are our tech leads who also help shape and contribute to product roadmaps and take a lead in answering technical questions and helping the community, Daniel Pierce from Indiana University and Trey Pendragon from Princeton University. I especially want to recognize a large contribution to the community, which is Julie Hardesty's service over the last 2 years as Hyrax product owner. Julie's steadfast guidance and patience and enthusiasm has helped the Hyrax community stay on track, from her hard work with the Hyrax maintenance group to her ideas on the roadmap alignment group. I truly believe we could not have made such great improvements in the last 2 years without Julie, who is also the biggest cheerleader for our maintenance pledge program that you heard was so successful this year. So you're going to hear from Julie during this conference, and you're also going to get to meet our next Hyrax product owner, Rebecca Cotti. So thank you again, Julie. Last year, we started a new award to recognize the volunteers who make this community happen. And this award honors the late Julie Allenson, a beloved Samvera community member who was an incredible mentor and teacher and friend. And the community now presents an annual award in Julie's name to a community member who exemplifies her collaborative spirit. Anyone can donate to keep this award funded, and they provide funding to future awardees with a plaque and a check for $200. So I'm thrilled to congratulate the very first recipient of the 2022 Julie Allenson Award is Tamsin Johnson from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Tamsin was jointly nominated by 3 different folks in the community from 3 different institutions. And in their nomination letter, they noted that Tamsin should be given the award in recognition of their outstanding technical leadership, mentorship, and tireless efforts in addressing and raising awareness about issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in our community. Their letter ends by noting that the efforts of one person can truly make a difference. Julie Allenson was one such individual, and Tamsin Johnson is as well. So congratulations again, Tamsin. Thank you for your outstanding and continuing contributions to the Samvera community. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Carolyn to talk about our governance and finances.
Thanks, Heather. So hopefully I won't bore you. I'm just going to end this talk with just a few last business items. Oops. There we go. The board. I want to thank the board for all their engagement this past year. Specifically, I want to thank the outgoing members listed here. I will note that in addition to our normal 3 outgoing members, Nabila also left the community last week as she started a new job, not in libraries. So we will have a special open seat for the elections. Additionally, I want to recognize Esme, who has been the chair-elect this past year. He will be an excellent person to chair the board as we continue to focus on our technology stack. Lastly, this year, the board asked the partners to codify in our bylaws having that past chair position to help with organizational knowledge transfer. If a past chair position is beyond a normal term, then the person will remain as ex officio, as I will be doing in 2023, because this will be my 4th year on the board. So now on to our finances. But first, I do want to mention and thank Oasis Open, as we now have had a full year of being hosted by them and running as an independent nonprofit. This was the first year that our dues were compulsory for partnership, and our fiscal year is now aligned with the calendar year. So unlike in past years, you're going to see our full report about our finances in our annual report, which should come out in January, early 2023. But in sum, we are in firm footing. We had growth in income over last year due to new partners coming on board and due to our first year of dues to maintain partner status. Also, we'd really like to thank UNC Chapel Hill for their donation this year. We welcome donations either from institutions that cannot contribute at the full partnership level or from partners that have some extra cash on hand and want to contribute above and beyond their dues. Expenditures this year include our payroll for community manager, consulting and legal fees, general operating expenses like office supplies, Circle CI, Zoom, Slack, etc., our Oasis hosting fees, and the salary that we're reimbursing to a partner for the part-time HireX tech lead. We will have to continue to increase income in order to sustain the technical paid staff role beyond that June 30th, 2023, especially if we want to hire part-time into a role like that. So that's what we have for our current state and what we have accomplished together over the past year. I look forward to 2023 and seeing how we can bring Samvera into the future. So cheers, everyone. I've got my little Samvera mug here. I hope you were able to get some swag on the Redbubble website.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. And we'll be able to take, if you have any follow-up questions for Carolyn and I, we'll be taking a look at the Samvera Connect Slack. But now it's my pleasure to welcome Don Bauer and Michaela Narlock with their presentation, What the Fair Do Repositories Need?
Thanks so much, Heather and all. We're really excited to be here. Don will be sharing his screen. And yeah, our presentation is titled, What the Fair Do Repositories Need? Thanks, Don. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of who we are. So I'm joined today by Don Brower, the assistant research professor. You can't move your slides, Don. The assistant research professor at the Center for Research Computing at the University of Notre Dame. I'm Michaela Narlock. I'm the director of the Data Curation Network based at the University of Minnesota. Next slide, please. So you might already know what this is, but for those who don't, we're going to spend some time today talking about FAIR. And FAIR is an acronym, and it's a very successful acronym. And it stands for Findable, on the next slide, please, Don. Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Now, what these are a set of guiding principles. There are 15 principles in total, broken down into these 4 categories to encourage data reuse, data discoverability, and to maximize what we can get out of data sets. Next slide, please. You might be thinking that's great, but I need to know a little more about them. So the FAIR data principles are a technology agnostic guidelines for your data and metadata. These started as an academic conversation on how to make specifically biology data more usable. These scholars were aware that there was a lot of data being collected, but it was hard to find, and it was hard to even reuse past that point. And so this was one attempt of many to really grapple with how do we organize and get, again, the most value out of all the data being generated. One thing FAIR had going for it is that it's a really catchy mnemonic. And so the principles slowly began making their ways into policies, sharing mandates, and other requirements. As we will reiterate, these are just principles. These are not, in fact, like a checklist. But we don't have time to go into more detail than that. So if you're interested in learning more, there's a website at the bottom of the slides, go-fair.org. And you can go learn about those more while we unpack what might be your next question, which is on the next slide, why FAIR matters, or why does it matter? Okay, on the next slide, here's a non-exhaustive list of reasons that you might care about FAIR data for your repository. There are many extrinsic and intrinsic reasons. One extrinsic reason is funders and journal requirements. So these are FAIR data principles are increasingly making their ways into mandates about data management plans and data sharing plans. So for example, the NIH, NSF, the recent White House OSTP memo, all of these mention FAIR data, or they come real close to mentioning FAIR data without actually saying FAIR. So you can tell that these have had a really strong impact on external requirements for sharing data. One intrinsic desire you might want to embrace these FAIR data principles is the idea that data and related source code are first-class scientific citizens, and they should be preserved, as we heard about from our keynote speaker. But one thing that we will pose to all of you is what's the point of keeping data that's never going to be found, accessed, or reused again? And so FAIR is a really good, can be a good driver from the intrinsic perspective of wanting to make sure that data can be really utilized as much as possible. And it also promotes reproducible science, which we've seen how important that is in the current COVID-19 pandemic. Lastly, there's this vision of interoperability. There is, I don't need to tell all of you, a proliferation of repositories that all use different standards and practices. And FAIR works towards a linked data possibility because interoperability between repositories is essential. As we keep growing, how can users search across as many repositories as possible without having to go to each one? In fact, my colleague Don prompts you to think about how many repositories are there. Any guesses? And would you want to go searching through even more than 5 of them? Next slide, please. But to kind of start tying this up to lead into Don's portion, FAIR is really a distillation of good research data management practices. And it's important for your repository for a couple of reasons beyond what those researcher motivations might be. First, it can help you receive the recognition for all of the awesome work that you are doing. Researchers, if they aren't already, are going to come to your repository and say, are you FAIR compliant or something to that effect? And having an answer ready will be really invaluable for keeping and finding new folks to deposit data. It can also help you stay up to date on maintenance. That's, one of those hard things to do. But if you have to stay on top of what being fair looks like for your repository, you have to keep maintaining it. And lastly, you don't want to be a lonely island repository. You don't want to be separated from all of the other repository infrastructure in the US and internationally. And FAIR helps you think about how to tap into that. So on the next slide, we have the hot take that your repository is already FAIR. Because there's no certification process, to some degree, your repository is already FAIR. I mean, who can tell you that it's not, right? But on the next slide, your repository can be more FAIR too. On the next slide, sorry, these are quick slides. FAIR is not all or nothing, done or not done. It's about constantly working and developing your technology and workflows to continuously improve and maximize the fairness of your content. And that includes, again, both data and metadata. FAIR is a process, and every step, every improvement is good. Put another way, on the next slide, FAIR is a compass, not a map. It tells you where you're headed or where your researchers might want you to head, but not necessarily how to get there. And with that, I'll turn it over to my coworker, Don Brower.
Thanks, Michaela. It's trickier when you do this with, sorry. Okay, let me move on. So, all right, after the hot take on that you're already FAIR, the question is, what can you do to work towards FAIR? So, and since FAIR is an academic discussion, or it started as academic discussion, there aren't really any standards, but there are ideas of things you can do. And I think it's important to talk about like what repository managers and developers especially can do, since a lot of these involve like some software architectural decisions. So the 5 kind of low-hanging fruits that we have noticed or we have identified, we want to point out, are persistent identifiers, explicit licensing, landing pages, metadata harvesting, and machine actionable interfaces. And as I was listening to the keynote today, I was just seeing all these things click off. So like these are very good starting point to work on. So persistent identifiers, like we need a way to refer to things unambiguously at a worldwide level. This is especially true when your metadata is harvested or when other search engines are pointing back to your content. But identifiers also exist over time, since people will cite items and scholarship will build itself on top of it. And so since the names of things are so critical, this is really the most important service a repository can provide. Like nothing else is really useful without these. Now, the key with persistent identifiers is keeping them persistent. So like even after repository migrations, even after collections move, even after institutions combine, like you need to think long-term for these. So the current consensus is that URLs are an effective worldwide identifier scheme, since they have uniqueness properties and they're resolvable, they can turn into a web page. But relying on URLs is tricky, since what if your repository changes web frameworks or implementations where the old identifiers and paths still work? If you move from, say, a vended solution to Samvera, like will the identifiers still work? Like this requires some engineering forethought and care. Like one possible solution, there's a few possible solutions. One of them is DOIs. Essentially the DOI registry acts as like an indirection between the identifier and your repository. Another one are like these archival resource keys, which are free. They have nice properties and they should be more common in my opinion. One subtle issue to think about is that items may have more than one identifier. Like a paper may have a publisher DOI in addition to an identifier that your repository assigns, or an item may have a repository identifier in addition to another one, like how archive papers have an archive ID and a DOI. So you should need to design your software to account for this, that there's not that 2 different identifiers may refer to the same thing. The next low-hanging fruit is licensing. I always confuse licensing with copyright, but they're very two different concepts. Copyright is who owns the item, and licensing is how you can reuse it. And for people to use your content, they need to know what kinds of reuse is allowed. Like, is it only available for research? Can they remix it into art projects? Can they use it as a machine learning data set for their startup? Explicit is better than implicit, when, and especially and over relying on fair use, but it does require the copyright holder to indicate the license that the item is available under. The licensing term should show up on the item info page, and additionally, like the licensing ideally should also be machine readable as part of some harvesting campaign. Sorry. It's too complicated. I can't handle slides too. Okay, moving on. Landing pages. Landing pages are important. They provide content about an item, and they provide context so people can see if this is the thing they want or not want. They also, separating the landing page from the files is helpful, since sometimes an item may have more than one file, or there may be private files, or there may be files that were removed for some reason. So most of the time, knowing that an item exists, even if it cannot be accessed, is worthwhile, especially for people looking for stuff. Like if they know that it's at least there, they can figure out who to ask. That's a win. And if you have file versioning, you need a way to list older versions. So also part of the context that a landing page provides is your repository branding. Like this, like saying that this item is in this repository, and also these are the links if you need assistance or if you have a problem with it. And additionally, like general purpose search engines tend to prefer to index web pages over like files itself. So they would prefer to index a landing page that has, especially if it had like schema.org or microdata on the page. Okay. The fourth low-hanging fruit is metadata harvesting. So as Michaela said, we live in a world where there are plenty of digital repositories. So how would people even know to search your repository in the first place? They probably don't, in fact. People tend to rely on general search engines to find things. Even in the library, there's usually a central search service that is not usually the repository. So your repository content should be harvestable to increase the chance of someone finding your stuff. Some search engines will just index it without you doing anything. Others may require a harvesting endpoint like OAI PMH. And it's useful to think about what indexes would be useful to people looking for your content. Like if you have very specialized content, you may want to make sure that it's in a domain specific search service, if there is one. And also, like if you have mostly academic articles or general purpose data, you probably would have a different target than if you have like more cultural heritage items, for example. And then kind of related to metadata harvesting is machine actionable interfaces. So the surprising aspect of FAIR is that it's not just for people. It's explicit, even in the original published manifesto, that machine agents are essential for finding content. So this means like use standard protocols where possible, use standard interfaces, file formats, and of course these standards will change over time. That's how things work. This expands on just having metadata harvesting, since traditional metadata harvesting protocols have usually very limited metadata fields, and your repository probably has more extensive metadata. So make it available to agents and make a way for machine agents to even retrieve content too. So sometimes people may just need a few hundred items, like maybe weather data for an entire region or state, or sometimes they may have data processing pipelines and they want to provide reproducible scripts to start by retrieving data directly from the source. Niche disciplines may even have developed specialized search indexes. This is actually coming from the keynote. They have specialized tools that can that knows how to interact with their kind of data. So one example is like IIIF interfaces. Another one is like the astronomers. I don't know if anyone's noticed, over the last 20 years, the astronomers have been built their international virtual observatory, and they've established common protocols, file formats, and metadata so that data repositories and tools can work together and they can seamlessly. It's truly amazing. And I see other disciplines also going down this road. So this is something to keep an eye on. And this is only possible if you actually think about adding what is needed for an API, right? And so finally, I would like to encourage you to not be afraid to walk in the FAIR direction. So at the end of the day, FAIR is about improving access and reuse to data and content for your repository, for both your users and their machine agents. And FAIR is not all or nothing. You can make small changes and improve things today. Do not try to wait for FAIR for your rewrite. And finally, like, you are not alone. There are many resources available. And since there's no standard, like, we can explore what exactly FAIR is together. So finally, I'm gonna leave it with our contact info. So, all right, I think Michaela and I both welcome questions if there are any. Oh, thanks. So I'm not even sure of the time, so.
Yeah, we've got about 4 minutes for questions. If
All right.
anybody's got any questions for Dawn and Michaela, thank you both.
We also welcome comments. Oh, when Dawn's email is wrong on that slide, my apologies. It should be Brower. So
Oh, you
I messed
typed
up.
it wrong.
I did. Man, Dawn, we really, oof.
Good job.
All right, last call for any questions for Dawn and Michaela. All right, thank you both. You
All right.
definitely started some conversation about this topic in the Connect Slack. So
Thanks for
we're gonna
having
take a look
us.
at that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll take a look.
I hope that no one can hear my little dog snoring next to me. He's really going at it today. Okay, great. Next up, I'm excited to welcome our next speakers, Esme Cowles and Wynn Cowles, with engaging with the entire research data management lifecycle.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks, Michaela and Dawn, for setting the stage so well for what we're going to talk about here. So, hi everyone, I'm Wynn Cowles. I'm the Director of Data Research and Teaching Services at Princeton University Library. And I'm going to start us off. We're gonna pass the baton back and forth, Esme and I. But I'd like to start us off by talking about the Princeton Research Data Service, or the wind back to the beginning of where we are in our data management lifecycle journey. So the Princeton Research Data Service was founded in 2019 as a partnership between the library, our Dean for Research office, and our Office of Information Technology, or Campus IT. And we were charged with taking a whole lifecycle approach to providing support and services around data management and open data, fair data, for researchers from any discipline at Princeton. All right, so that's kind of our origin story. I came to Princeton as the founding director of this service. And like many other services of its kind, PRDS naturally focuses on one side of this life cycle, right? Effectively, or essentially, the beginning and the ends of projects, right? So planning, and then we kind of skip over the acquiring, processing, and analyzing pieces. And then when you're ready to share results, we're there for you. And this is actually in line with our campus partners, particularly in the Office of Sponsored Research, which is part of our Dean for Research office, who also work with researchers on the beginnings and endings of projects, with funders in general who have kind of a gatekeeping function in terms of requiring certain things, even for the application, to get grant funding. And then once you have funding, requirements on your research outputs. So we're really well aligned with them there. We are also really interested in ensuring the long-term value of the research data created by Princeton researchers. And as Michaela and Dawn talked about how many repositories are out there, there's about, well, if you go to Re3 Data's registry, there's a little over 2,000 data repositories out there. And so as a generalist repository, we thought really hard about what do we uniquely offer to our researchers? How are we more than just repository number 2001. And one of the clear needs that we saw, and many of you are probably in the same boat, is support for large data. So we started really leaning into that and thinking through how can we support our researchers as they engage with large, complex data sets that they want to be able to make fair. I'll mention too that we also, again, work with researchers at the beginnings of their projects using DMP tool, so sort of on the planning side. Sorry. So sticking with the data sharing piece, though, it turns out that if you wait until the very end of a project before preparing your data for publication, then it's hard. And so, we'd have, in the data management plans and data sharing plans, researchers often commit to sharing data by publishing it in a repository. They're often interested in doing it for other reasons as well. And we've had several cases where researchers have come to us to publish, especially, again, large data, and then they'll disappear for a few weeks, right? So we talk with them, we're like, okay, here's what you can do, here's the kinds of metadata, here's what a README should look like, here's what we need. They go off, couple weeks pass, couple more weeks pass, we might nudge them to say, how's it going? And then they'll come back and say, wow, that was a lot harder than I thought it would be. And so if we're really going to help our researchers produce shareable research data sets, we need to engage with them here in the middle too, right, in the blue, ideally with tools and services. All right, so that's the PRDS side. Meanwhile, over in research computing, which is in the Office of Information Technology, in conversations with Kurt Hilligus, who's the director of research computing, it became really clear that they were facing some of the same kinds of issues and interests. There was alignment. They were also looking for ways that researchers could take better care of their data, at least in the sense of not piling more and more data into the enormous storage buckets that we provide. And what I'm showing you here is sort of a high-level landscape of what our data storage looks like on campus. This is probably also pretty familiar to some of you, not all of you. We've got on the left kind of centrally managed storage options through our campus at IT, through research computing, through the library. And then on the other side, we've got departmental servers. We've got the storage attached directly to instruments like microscopes. We've got, the faculty's own laptops, workstations, and then we have the dreaded faculty bookshelf, or this is the, the storage under the desk that we really want to try to get away with having. And so in talking with Kurt, we realized that we actually had we had independent but common and aligned needs if we could just work together to solve them together. And so, on the one hand, we had this steadily increasing demand on them for research storage. We had a shared value in wanting to ensure the long-term value of the research data. And so we started talking together with a huge group of people, and I'll come to that later, to align this together into what became Tiger Data. So about 18 months later, we put in a proposal. It was generously funded by our provost to provide Princeton's campus with the next generation of research data storage that is performant and functional, able to be updated agilely, but not just the hardware, also the management tools and services designed to create a community of practice. And we're taking not just a life cycle approach, but also a kind of ecosystem approach. So what this is going to look like, we're just in the beginning stages of this now, is having a set of different kinds of storage buckets, running from hot to cold, different tiers, connected together, and then wrapped in a kind of middleware, a set of data management tools or presentation layer. And this is complemented by, in the same team, in the same service, having data management services that provide training and consultations to data managers. Oh, let me mention that all the data that's going to be in Tiger Data has to have a data manager. It's one of the things that we ask for as data gets ingested, or there's an application to have data in Tiger Data. And so when we have a new data manager identified, we can reach out to them and say, hello, new data manager friend, let me help you, do good things with the tools that we provide for you. We have metadata governance. And we have a core set of metadata, mostly discovery metadata, but a little bit more than that we collect at the beginnings of projects to help kind of, again, work with researchers through the whole life cycle. So if we go back to the life cycle, what I have on the right here is just a quick sketch that I drew to show how Tiger Data and our existing services, our existing data repository combine to address the entire research life cycle. And so I really want to stress how key partnerships are to this project. This is a close collaboration between research computing and the library, but it's not just a partnership with our campus colleagues in research computing and in the Office of Sponsored Research, but also our colleagues in library IT. And that's where I turn things over to Esme.
All right. Oh, so I want to talk about why library IT is involved in this project, because at first glance, this looks like a campus IT project that doesn't have a lot to do with sort of our normal work. And I will say, looking at this project and thinking about the tools that the project was planning on using, like presentation layers, you know, these sort of middleware platforms that aggregate storage and provide management interfaces, they need to be integrated with a lot of different systems. Access control is a thing that they have support for, but there's a lot of other things like requesting systems, grant management systems, Globus for data transfer, ORCID for some metadata, and ultimately a lot of this data is going to become data sets that come into our research data repository. So these presentation layers have integration possibilities, they have APIs, but it definitely means that custom code needs to be written to integrate all of these things. And they really don't have the kind of usability that we think they would need to be able to turn loose all of our users on campus and expect good results. They look like the kind of systems that we would expect, you know, storage administrators to be able to use, but maybe not, you know, any faculty member, any grad student. So we really see a need to integrate these things, provide a more seamless experience, and just make it a better experience for all of our researchers. And that kind of lines up with what our strengths are. We have a lot of experience building applications with metadata forms and workflows. The team that'll be working on this recently built some new data repository applications for ingest and discovery of applications called the Princeton Data Commons. The broader group has a lot of experience from the Figgy repository, from building a number of Blacklight applications. So we really know about, you know, workflows, forms, discoverability in ways that we think can really help here. We also have a lot of experience with metadata, which is really a key need of these systems. All of the presentation layers provide the ability to attach metadata to files and directories. And we have experience not just with descriptive metadata, but also with structural metadata. You know, implementing, or in some cases, developing standards like IIIF, METS, PCDM. We have a lot of experience working with not just individual files or small things, but complex hierarchies of files. And so we really feel like that can be really useful in working with and describing data sets. And lastly, I'll just say that we have a really good reputation for commitment to standards, to sustainable development and open source development that makes us a really attractive partner for this kind of project. The other way to look at the question, and a question I keep asking myself recently when thinking about projects or talking to people about projects, is what's going to happen if we don't engage in the project? If we don't participate in this project, data sets are going to keep coming. And the pain points that we have now in ingesting them will continue in some form. Researchers and faculty will continue to have files and projects that they want to bring as digital collections too, which can be even more fraught in some cases. So we feel like there's a lot of pain points. There's a lot of data that's coming our way from these systems. And so we need a better set of tools to manage these processes. And this is an opportunity for us to sort of have some influence in that process. And so I like to think about the set of possibilities. I would say that there are some real pain points now in just requesting, managing storage, transferring files. If all we are able to do is aggregate the storage, have some better services around them, and manage that a little bit better, then that will be a real win. But we can do better than that. I hope that we can improve the metadata that's coming in with these projects, that we can streamline dataset ingest, and otherwise improve some of these sort of workflows that already exist. And if we're being really optimistic, I hope that we can bring our experience with digital collections and other kinds of workflows and really transform the way that research is happening on campus, empowering our users to transform their workflows the way we've transformed ours.
And so I mentioned before that this has been a big project. I want to acknowledge that it absolutely is a team effort and a campus-wide project. We've had about 30 people involved over the last 18 months or so, involved in the planning. About 30 different people drawn from about 12 different units on campus. So I'm gonna make sure that you see all their names. It's a lot of conversations and all over Zoom, I'll add.
And I will also just say that some of the team that are working on this are in the audience right now, and I'm really excited about the group that we have put together. Some of these folks have been working on the project for quite some time. Some of them are just starting on the project now, and some of them will be pulled in a little bit later, especially on the operations side. We think it's a really strong team, and we're really excited about what we're going to be able to accomplish.
With that, thank you. We're happy to field any questions, comments.
Oh, I see a raised hand. Let me get in there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Esme. And I'm sorry, I forget the other presenter's name already. My question is just thinking back to the keynote about domain-specific repositories. I'm just wondering if you can reflect on at Princeton, if you notice some tension or just, what's the balance between sort of a generalized data repository service versus folks working in domains, very focused in strong domains and managing their data in that community, in that environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, Hannah. Hi, it's Wen. So I would say, let me start by saying, as a matter of policy, or certainly practice, we want researchers to put their data where it will be found and reused. And for research communities that have a robust data community already in place, we encourage our faculty and our students to use those repositories, and we work with them to ensure that the data is formatted, the metadata is right, everything that they need to be able to deposit in those repositories as well. So we don't insist or even encourage our faculty to deposit with us in our generalist repository if there's a better repository, a domain-specific repository out there, or a data community. So I'm not sure that there's tension exactly, but I'm glad you asked about this, because from a metadata perspective, one of the things we're thinking about for Tiger Data, and the reason that we established metadata governance, basically an advisory committee, is because while at the beginning of the project, we're going to require, have a very small, very focused set of required metadata, our plan longitudinally is to work with researchers in different communities to make sure that we can also support the metadata standards that they would like to use based on their own data communities. And in that kind of flow chart that I showed at the end, the idea is that data in Tiger Data might not end up in our repository, in the institutional data repository. It could well, and I hope it does, end up in again, whichever repository makes the most sense for it, where it will be found and reused.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was definitely listening to the recommendations to use domain-specific repositories and completely seeing that, but as somebody developing a generalist repository, thinking about how do we look to those domain-specific repositories and their requirements and their metadata, and use that as guidance and try to make it as easy as possible for people to harvest the data that they want from our repository, if it would make sense in combination with other data in a particular domain.
Yeah, I was thinking something very similar as my.
Okay, last call for any other questions. Thank you both. That was great. It did fit really well with our last presentation too. All right, well, now it's time for our another 10-minute break, and we're going to come back together at 1:30 Eastern time. So really about a 14-minute break. So we'll see you then. All right, it is 1:30. Now we have some working group updates. And first up with an update is Kai.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Kai Strad. I'm a senior software engineer with software services by scientist.com, also known as SoftServe. And I'll be giving the update for the Samvera developer onboarding working group. So our current members are Kate Sewell, Julie Hardesty, Heather Greer-Klein, and myself. The goals of the working group are to create documentation and other resources designed to help Samvera developer teams onboard a developer who has no Samvera experience, and then also to create plans to ensure this documentation can stay up to date via scheduled reviews and updates. We decided early on, working in the working group, on a roadmap, and decided that we would focus on these locations as far as updating, making sure that documentation is updated. And in these locations, we decided that all of them should point to each other, and then also target some specific audiences, those being repository managers, including those who are considering Hyrax as a solution or other Samvera solutions, and then also developers who are working in the stack and DevOps persons who are responsible for deploying Samvera stacks. Where are we now in the process? Right now, we have compiled a current list of existing documentation and analyzed that list to see what is out there, what's up to date, what's outdated, what's no longer relevant, what can be merged into other locations, and then also plan how to move forward with that knowledge. So we have finished phase 1 just recently and started phase 2, which is going to be focusing on updating the Hyrax README. Each of those focus locations from the roadmap are going to be broken out into their own phases, where all of us focus on getting them up to date for everyone. After phase 2, or just next for the group in general, moving forward from now, we are planning to have phase 2, the Hyrax README update, done by January of the next year, 2023. And then after that, we will be moving on to the next focus location on the roadmap, which has at this point yet to be determined. And if you're interested in joining and contributing, we're specifically looking for supervisors and senior developers who have faced the challenger of developer onboarding. Also looking for new developers in the Samvera stack. Their perspective can be really helpful as far as identifying pain points. And then also anyone else interested really or feel strongly about what the work that we're doing. If you are interested, you can reach out to either myself in Slack or Heather, and we'll be able to help you join the group. And that's it for this update.
Excellent. Thanks, Kai. So next up, we have James. If you're ready, James.
Yes, can everyone see my?
Yes, looks great.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is James Griffin. I am a research data infrastructure developer with the Princeton University Library, and my pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm going to be providing a short update for the core component maintenance working group. Following the last Samvera Connect as well as Developer Congress, this has actually been restructured as the component interest group. Currently, there is a regularly scheduled meeting time from 9 a.m. Pacific or 12 Eastern, held every Thursday weekly, although there has been a hiatus for a number of weeks in preparation for Samvera Connect. The Slack channel dedicated for component maintenance is hashtag component maintenance. There is an actual dedicated Confluence page building off of the previous working group phases for those who are familiar with the working group in the past. And on this page, there's also a listing of the resources that currently are being queued to be addressed from the standpoint of active ongoing maintenance and just standardization and cleanup. A number of these are also within the Samvera Labs organization, and there are some links here as well to documentation. Now, currently, there is no active ongoing activity, as there's actually a community discussion that's been initiated on Samvera Tech. Thank you very much, Heather and Rob Kaufman, for leading and organizing much of this. There's actually a poll on Samvera Tech for all members of the community who are very interested in seeing how core components can really be actively restructured given the shift in developer resources and, in fact, a likely shift in demand for the usage of certain core components. We're very interested in any and all feedback in a general sense for who might be available to take on the responsibility of product ownership, or just generally getting a sense for guidance and desired paths ahead for maintaining core components. And pending this discussion in early November, planning future community sprints and efforts will remain an aim of the component maintenance interest group. For anyone who happens to be interested in participating in these efforts, or again, just interested or concerned regarding their active usage of core components, please contact me on Slack. I have both my alias here, as well as I'm open to contact attempts by email, and I will render myself available. Beyond this, I look forward to the meeting in early November, and I welcome, again, any and all questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. So I have next up Nora.
Hi, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
All right, so hi, I'm Nora Zimmerman. I'm the digital repository librarian at Lafayette College. And along with Anna Goslin at UNC Chapel Hill, I'm a co-facilitator of the Samvera Metadata Interest Group. Anna and I will be rotating off as co-facilitators, and we are welcoming the new SMIG facilitator starting right now at Samvera Connect for the next year, who is Anna Marie Close from The Ohio State University. So the Samvera Metadata Interest Group concentrates primarily on metadata as it relates to Samvera projects, in conversation with developments in broader metadata practitioner communities. So the purpose and goals of SMIG, as it's known, is to provide support for the community and a space in our monthly meetings to ask metadata questions. We also identify models that may help Samvera newcomers and prospective implementers. We work to further interoperability among Samvera projects, and we collect and create documentation related to metadata modeling. We meet monthly on the 4th Tuesday of every month from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern via Zoom. And you can find notes from all of our meetings, demos, and roundtables, as well as some of the documentation that we've collected at our dedicated wiki page on the Confluence. The link for that is on this slide, and is also on the metadata and interest group hub of the wiki. And there is a Slack channel in the Samvera community workspace, which is just metadata. So in the past year, we met monthly. We held 2 roundtable discussions. The first one in January was on metadata for diversity, equity, and inclusion. At that roundtable, we had panelists from Indiana University, University of Tennessee, and Princeton, who shared their work with regards to drafting harmful language statements for their collections and creating reporting forms for users. In September, we had a roundtable on accessibility work in the metadata context. In the past year, we also had discussions and began work to gather documentation on Samvera's support for OAI PMH harvesting. The work so far on that is available on our wiki at this link right here, and it's ongoing. We have continued to collaborate and liaise with the Roadmaps Alignment Group and the HIRAX Interest Group. Our next meeting is Tuesday, November 22nd from 2 to 3. And this is an open group. Anyone can join, and anyone can help out with the work on this. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Nora. And then next we have John Cameron.
Share my screen up. Hello, everyone. I'm John Cameron, and I'm here to do the Roadmaps Alignment Group update for the Samvera Connect. There we go. So the Roadmaps Alignment Group, our main objective is to basically be sort of a high-level interface to identify sort of the things that are going on across the community, things that people want to work on, conflicts, issues, and tries to work with basically a wide variety of interests within the Samvera community, and also be a point of communication. So here are the current members. So this isn't entirely accurate. So one, I want to welcome Rebecca as the product owner for HIRAX, who'll be subbing in for Julie, who's moving to the representative for the Samvera Metadata Interest Group. And Alexandra Dunn also joins us. And Nabila, of course, is moving on to a position at Michigan Medicine, so I'll miss her, but she was representing the Samvera Repository Management Interest Group and was a long-running member of this group as well. So some of the activities we've done since last Connect, one, we've been talking about piloting interns, maybe that's worded weirdly, but a mentorship program. So this is coming from Rob Kaufman. And so if you're interested in that sort of thing, you should maybe get in touch with him. But it's something that we're interested in talking about. Another thing on the list is the GitHub Teams and Maintenance Repo and the Samvera Development Dependency Communication Plan, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So one thing that I want to mention is work on GitHub. So some of this is not super recent, but I wanted to call it out specifically about maintenance repository updates. So we have this maintenance repository and it has a dedicated project board for core components. James has set up all sorts of interesting things. Set up scripts so everybody can push Ruby gems. He pruned up the GitHub team. So I want to say thank you, James. Check out that work if you haven't seen that in our organization. And the other thing going on right now is the Samvera Development Dependency Communication Plan. So the idea behind this is basically to make sure that we have some sort of maintained schedule or some sort of communication system to make it proactive rather than reactive when there are large dependency updates that might impact the community or a wide range of the software that we work on. So this is currently in the draft stage, but the idea here is, basically a communication chain of project owners talking to the Roadmap Alignment Group, Roadmaps Alignment Group working to schedule and organize community sprints. Any relevant deadlines, the work needed, and sort of getting all that a little more organized, just so that we can really sort of streamline that within the community. So that's the idea. And so what's next for the Roadmap Alignment Group? There's not a whole lot of updates because we took a hiatus for the summer. But again, we want to finalize that communications plan for predictable maintenance. That's currently the focus. Reviewing the group charter again, we've had some different changes within the group. So I think we're also just thinking, what is the next step? How do we look forward? And that's my update. So thank you. Documents are on the wiki. We're also on Samvera Slack, so anybody can jump in and talk to us or anything like that. So thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, we have a couple of minutes if anyone has a burning question for the working group folks before we close out our day with some lightning talks. All right, thank you all so much. We'll go ahead and get started with lightning talks. And first up, we have Rob.
All right, let's try unmuting. How about that? Can anyone hear me?
Yep, looks great. Sounds great.
Thank you, Heather, for being the chief nodder for everybody as we get talk started. I'm Rob Kaufman. I identify with he, him, his. I'm here to talk to you today about the Picard maneuver, which is a importing maneuver that importing technique that we've been using here at Scientist to speed up metadata importing. So in Star Trek, the Picard maneuver is a method of moving your ship very small distances at light speed in order to appear as if the ship is in two places at once on the sensor array of an enemy ship. It is also in Star Trek what the cast and crew called what Patrick Stewart would do when he tugged his outfit down all the time because it had a tendency to ride up. And it's in hundreds and hundreds of shots on episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Him tugging his suit all the time is also called the Picard maneuver. But what the heck does that have to do with Samvera applications? So one of the issues that we often face in our projects is that importing large sets of data frequently needs to be done much more quickly than we would like it to do, or much more quickly than it is currently happening. Delays add up and can make importing much more slow than we would like it to be. Also, any project deadline slippage has a tendency to affect the importing of data because it tends to be later in the project timeline. So the first thing we need to do is check for other speed issues, things like networking, pulling for flowing files from a remote source. Is that source blocking us or slow? Indexing speed. This is especially true of the nested indexer, which can be a big slowdown issue, or file processing. But at some point, it is actually just the process of stuffing the data into Fedora that is causing the speed to be slow. And that's where this technique is helpful. We've specifically developed it and have been using it on applications that are metadata only at the moment. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So what do you do? What we've been doing is we'll create multiple copies of the whole application stack. So a separate Fedora, separate Solr, separate Redis, except for the database the actual Hyrax application talks to. You leave that the same for all of them. If you're connecting to Postgres or MySQL, it can more than handle the load. That way all the permissions templates all get created in the same location, and you don't have to migrate both the database and the Fedora repo. You just can migrate the Fedora repo. Then we make sure that any admin sets or collections used by a given import set that are shared amongst other import sets, not being put in the same repo, are pre-created. So if you have, for example, maybe all of your works are going into a default admin set, but they're creating a few small collections as you go, that's completely fine. But if it's like everything goes into one large collection, both from this import and from other imports you're doing, then that needs to be pre-created. And it needs to be the same in IDs in the Fedora repos across the different Picard maneuver servers. So we may have 4 or 5 servers running. We could do 20 if you needed to. Like the expandability is horizontal, is very large. Then you do the import work in parallel. So we typically use bulk racks to import work. So we would just have bulk racks running on 4 servers, 5 servers at the same time. In one instance where we did this, there was kind of regular work continuing to happen on production, both deposit and some staff-based importing there, while we were trying to bring in an import set of 2 million records, kind of using this Picard maneuver technique on the side. Then you export the data from a given Fedora. So Fedora has good ability to back up a single Fedora instance and re-import that into another Fedora instance. So you run that exporter. And then before you kind of clean out your Picard maneuver server, you want to get all the IDs from the works to make reindexing fast. And then you reindex those IDs. So basically, we take a Fedora backup, we import that Fedora backup into the production server, the kind of final resting place of it. And then we do a Solr index of just those items that we moved. So this is what it might look like visually. You can see here that I have Alpha, Bravo, Charlie in production. So I have 3 of these Picard maneuver servers, and I'm pumping data into each one of them separately. I have a combined Rails or Hierarch database down here at the bottom. This little guy indicates that Fedora should be backed by a real database. Please don't use the internal Fedora 4 database storage. Use MySQL or Postgres to back it. Solr, a Redis, Sidekick, and Rails. Sidekick and Rails need shared file service between them, and that's what this little guy represents. And so we just have full copies of the thing, and we're stuffing data in. It's literally appearing in multiple places at the same time. The database record parts are all coming into the Rails database, but the actual works themselves, the archival items, are happening in these individual Fedoras. And then when we're ready to take a batch, we will export from this Fedora, copy it into production, export from this Fedora, copy it into production, export from this Fedora, copy it into production, do an index over here of those new records, and off we go. This provides pretty substantial speed up. It's not a true like 1x speed up for every server you use because you do have that export import step at the end, but it can drastically reduce the amount of time it takes to bring in data, especially if you're bringing it in from like an OAI feed or some other remote source. Things we have not tried yet, super large sets. So anything over 1 million records, we typically are taking cuts of about 50K to 100K records at a time, and then importing them and then clearing out those Fedoras and starting them again. And then I know at very large scale, importing into Fedora can be slow. Like the backup still seems to go relatively fast, but the actual import part can really bog down, and it will not let you write additional records during the import. So it's worth noting that if importing takes a whole day, that is a day that the production site cannot take new data. And then the other thing we haven't tried yet, but should work theoretically, is items with attachments. When you do the Fedora backup, it doesn't really have a flag to say, hey, I'm going to keep my attachment, I'm going to copy the attachment separately for Fedora 4. If it did, then that would be like, that would kind of get us around this problem. But it makes a copy of every single item. So if you have large files that you're attaching to each of your records, this technique has some real flaws there, frankly. I'm really interested to look at in Fedora 6 or a Postgres Valkyrie based system, like does this technique still have value or does it become kind of untenable in the situations? But for Fedora 4, this is something we have found to be useful. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Sounds like we're ready for our next lightning talk.
Thanks, Rob. It was really cool. Our next lightning talk is from Anna Marie.
Hi there, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so I'm Anna Marie Close. I'm at Ohio State University Libraries. It's the one with the, which I skipped. So when I started my job in 2019, joining the Samvera community with a Samvera Hierarch repository of digitized and born digital special collections and archival materials was really a deep dive. So I thought I would reflect on things that I've learned, and I'm definitely not an expert. So if anyone has things to share, I would encourage you to do so in Slack. So in terms of platforms I've worked with or considered, there is a lot of options out here besides Samvera, like DSpace, Content DM, Digital Commons, and Islandora. And I think Samvera has a lot of really great options to provide. And I think it's important to celebrate these and discuss them and see about what we can continue to do to improve the code base. Because some of these open source options, such as Samvera, give the library community a better exit plan. And I think that was something that was discussed in DLF in terms of digital preservation too, is that there is a concern that when you get into bed with some of these vendors, it can be really hard to get your content out. And we do have vendors also in the Samvera space, but I can say from personal experience, Constantium was really painful to break up with. And it's easy for these vendors to promise that they give you everything, but we have a lot that we can show for here in this community. And something that gets me really excited is the idea of being able to search across state ranges with ambiguous dates. I do research with Digital Public Library of America, well, in Digital Public Library of America data, I should specify, about date metadata. And just in short, it can be really tricky with all the ambiguous dates and the various workarounds. And with some examples like Duke University libraries and Emory University libraries, they have these great ways of searching across state spans with ambiguous and uncertain dates. And this is due to the use of a subset of the extended date time format. And if you're not familiar with the extended date time format, it is a standard that was created by Library of Congress around 2012. And in 2019, it was formalized. There were some modifications made, and it was adopted by ISO 8601. So this is a real standard, not implemented widely in the community. It has some adoption, and some of our Samverans have provided this support with in the community, and I would like to see this added to the code base as an optional enhancement, because I think a lot of us would enjoy using that. And right now, we don't have that capability in my institution. So we're doing this case where we're encoding values with the hope that eventually we can share these machine readable dates as text dates to the public, but also provide that date searching, which is a really great thing. Another thing that really excites me is some adopters have found ways to provide more robust metadata. I think one of the challenges as a metadata librarian is Dublin Core's creator and contributor field. And I think for a lot of it, it's kind of a love-hate relationship working with Dublin Core. It's not quite the linked data arrangement that one would like, but I think this is something that is really great. And for those of us who have used mods, the ability to add more fields and provide a richer semantic relationship is helpful. I would say, though, that editing your metadata set with Samvera is harder than I would like it to be. So I'm really hoping that the M3 work in Allison Flex will come to fruition. So in Content DM, there is compound records. And what I've come to appreciate in Samvera is the idea of having a way to represent parent and child works. And so you may have one overarching work that is related to another work. And how do you represent that relationship? And we've been using it for our manuscript fragments, where we have a record that is the overarching manuscript fragment, and then there are the separate folios. And so both levels have metadata, and it's not like just having the file set, it's actually this connection between the two. And it's not something I initially knew about when I started in the Samvera community. And I noticed that Trinity College in Ireland is also using this for its manuscript fragments, but it can also be good for scrapbooks. In the case of harvesting with DPLA, we use this in terms of harvesting both the parents and the children. So we also have nesting collections, and Content DM, a lot of us have seen the way to nest communities and collections in that kind of arrangement, I have a stakeholder that would love to use that to mirror archival collections. It's not my favorite way to go about it, but it is something that I think has benefit. We have connections to ways to share that data, such as the Fedora connector that works with Omeka, but increasingly AAAF manifests are the way to go with sharing content. And I think even Content DM was a kind of a late adopter to going to the AAAF framework. But of course, there are various APIs that are used in the Samvera community that have benefit. But there are some gaps and pain points that I would like to mention. And one of those is the inability to order multiple values in a metadata field. And this is something that there is an issue in Samvera hierarchs to address. And it's a problem in the scholarly community as well. There is often an implication in metadata that the values that are listed first are the most important. And this is particularly the case with creators and contributors, especially with scholarship. And so in terms of semantics, it is a problem. It's a limitation with RDF. And I think that's something that would be great to deal with. I'm not as well-versed in terms of the connections to archive space. There is work on ArcLight, but this is something that's been discussed in SMIG and would possibly, if we address that, help with gaining more adopters. Something that shocked me is there isn't out-of-the-box support for OAI harvesting. And as Nora mentioned during the SMIG update, is there has recently been work to document some of that stuff, and there's been discussion about spinning up a working group to work to address this issue. And as I noted, it's really difficult to change metadata fields, which is not, if you work in Content DM or DSpace, it's a lot easier to make those changes. And lastly, I'm going to say that something that seems antithetical, but there's both limited, dispersed, and overly technical documentation. And I think for people who are not as tech savvy, it's not always clear what we offer in this community. And we offer a lot. And I would like to give them options besides going straight to a vendor like bpress or OCLC and let them see what there is, because even if they need a vendor because they don't have developers to support this work, we have vendors in this community, but they still have a better chance at preserving their content and getting it out if it turns out not to be the right platform for them. So those are my thoughts, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna Marie. Always great to hear about those pain points. And we have time if anyone has any questions. All right, definitely good conversation in the Slack. So thank you again. I'm going to close out the lightning talks with one of my own. All right, so you should see my slide there. I gave a version of this talk at the DLF forum this year, but I wanted to share it with the Samvera community as well. I started working directly with communities that support open source for cultural heritage organizations 6 years ago. I'm not a developer, I don't write any software code, and neither do many of the most active participants in the Samvera community. There are so many ways to contribute to open source, both in this community and in other open source communities that you may rely on. So I wanted to share why you might want to contribute and some participation options that you might want to consider. So if you're not familiar, open source at the most basic definition is it's a type of software license that makes software freely available to use, modify, and enhance. And in the cultural heritage ecosystem, open source projects provide, or often provide and can provide, the digital infrastructure that we need to do our work. So it's software built in the open, used and supported and built with support and input from a community of users like our community. So why might you want to contribute to open source, no matter what your current role or your current technical understanding might be? And first of all, I can assure you that open source needs you. Our open infrastructure relies on volunteers, and the tools we collectively produce are only made better by a greater diversity of perspectives and experiences. So many hands make light work, but we also need both new and experienced community volunteers to make sure that our open infrastructure does what it needs to do, and then it gets into the hands of those who can use it. Relying too much on the same few people can lead to burnout, and it can really set a community back. And I want to emphasize that code is important, of course, but code is just one part of making open source work. I think this quote from the open source guide is really spot on, that a common misconception about contributing to open source is that you need to contribute code. And in fact, it's often the other parts of a project that are most neglected or overlooked. So you'll do the project a huge favor by offering to pitch in with these types of contributions. One reason you might want to work within an open source community is to learn and develop your skills. You can take on something that you might not get to do in your regular role, or something you want to learn more about, an area where you might like to get more experience. You can learn more about how technology is made, how it works, how software gets done. And if you don't consider yourself a technologist now, but you want to learn more about those roles, an open source community is a great place for you. It's also a great place to learn facilitation. And of course, open source community includes people and institutions that are much like your own, but could also be a place to meet people who are in completely different roles and different kinds of organizations all around the world. It can mix up who you're working with regularly and help you make lasting connections. So hopefully I've given you something to think about why you might want to get involved, but how exactly would you go about doing it? So I've talked already today about working groups. They are done differently. There's different approaches in different communities. There's interest groups, there's working groups. Some communities call them advisory groups, but this is really where the work of open source community starts. So if you join a working or interest group, I guarantee you will be welcomed with open arms, even if at first you feel like you're just there to listen and learn. You probably won't just be listening and learning for long, because there's always ways that you can help. So for example, in our community, we have the marketing working group, where we're looking at outreach and engagement and promotion of Samvera technologies to folks who could use them, institutions who might want to investigate Samvera technologies that might be useful to them. So one thing that that group created is a very cool tour of Samvera repositories to highlight the institutions that are using the software. And that's the kind of idea that could come from anyone at any level in the institution who might want to learn more about, in this case, story maps, which is what we use to make this tool. There are also often groups that gather feedback and work together. And we had a repository manager interest group for a while in this community, and at sundown didn't have a lot of attendance. But this is the kind of group that we could always restart or start again if there was someone who wanted to volunteer who was really interested, or if there was a different kind of interest group that could fulfill that need. For example, in the DSpace community, they have DCAT, which is a DSpace community advisory team. So there's always options like that in open source communities, and we have space for that kind of a interest group in Samvera as well. So documentation, of course, is never complete. It's never up to date. It can be spread out. We have a working group that's trying to work on making that better, but it's always a challenge. Documentation can live on a wiki, and it can also live in GitHub. So contributing to the documentation that lives in GitHub, making it better and updating it, that's a great way to learn Markdown and to sort of dip your toe into using GitHub. And you don't need to write any code to do that. And release testing is a way to get involved periodically. You'll see calls for QA testing or quality assurance testing for Samvera. You'll see it in other communities as well. This is the testing that makes sure that the new software release is working as expected, and that nothing is breaking before we make that release. Sometimes the release testing is cloud-based, sometimes it's in a test environment, but it can be a great way to help the community and a great opportunity to work with different people and learn some new skills. And improving usability. There's lots of ways to contribute through working groups, helping with strategic planning of usability and accessibility work that needs to be done in our technologies, talking about what's frustrating, what's working in your institution and what isn't. You can make an issue report or a piece of Samvera software, or you can come to the weekly tech call and talk about what is or isn't working for you. Or if you do a usability or accessibility study on your repository locally, if you share that with the community, it can be really, really helpful. And then just general community building. Whenever someone can write a blog post about how they're using Samvera technology that we can post on the Samvera blog, that's hugely helpful for folks who are looking for examples of how Samvera components can work for them. You can start up an interest group. You can always talk to me about your ideas or about ways you'd like to contribute to the community. I'd be happy to help you. And so would community managers or equivalent in other open source communities you might be a part of. We often have ideas that we can't implement because we need someone else to investigate them or head them up. So that's all from me. Thanks, everybody. And we have a couple minutes if you have questions, and otherwise, we'll be ready to wrap up for the day. I don't see anything. Thank you so much for joining today. Thanks for patience with a couple of our little bumps in the road. It looks like there's some work I need to go do to make our SCED site work a little better, but please join us tomorrow. We'll be starting at 11 a.m. Eastern or 8 a.m. Pacific, and we have all kinds of great content tomorrow. So we will see you then.